Hey there, all you super musical fans. Welcome to Broadway by Ghostlight. I'm Mark Bonanni, and if you're new to the channel, thank you for being here. I love bringing interesting, not often discussed musicals and musical theater history to the forefront with hopefully a fun flair. This week, I'm diving into a flop musical from the 1960s. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman.
Faster than a speeding bullet.
Slowpoke.
More powerful than a locomotive.
Sorry about that, Amtrak.
Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
No sweat.
This groovy, pop art-inspired musical opened at the Alvin Theater, now called the Neil Simon, where MJ is currently playing, on March 26, 1966. It came during a transitional time in Broadway history. Broadway had just exited the so-called Golden Age a couple of years earlier, and was still a few years away from the Sondheim Prince era and the more adult musical. Whereas before, show tunes were the popular songs on the air, now the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and the Mamas and the Papas were at the top of the charts, and Broadway was becoming a tad uncool.
What?
No, that can't be true.
What?
So centering your new musical on a comic book hero, one at this point in history was considered at best kiddie stuff, was a big old risk. Clark Kent, aka Superman, of course, made his debut in Action Comics #1 in 1938. The Man of Steel starred in a popular radio show in the 1940s, and then made the leap to live action in the 1950s in the television show Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves in the title role. I'll always remember George Reeves as Superman from one of my favorite episodes of I Love Lucy.
So you mean to say that you've been married to her for 15 years?
Yeah, 15 years.
Then they call me Superman.
Years after Superman's stint on The Great Bright Way, he would of course scale the heights again in the world of popular culture, but more on that in a bit. The musical was the work of two sets of writing partners. David Newman and Robert Benton met while working for Esquire magazine, where David Newman was an editor and Robert Benton was the art director. The two became fast friends and writing partners and completed one screenplay that had yet to be picked up. Struggling, a fellow Esquire editor said that she had some friends they should meet, a pair of Broadway creators looking for material to adapt.
It's fate!
Charles Strouse and Lee Adams burst onto the Broadway scene in 1960, writing the score for Bye Bye Birdie. After that hit show, the collaborators had a couple of shows with varying degrees of success. At the meeting with Newman and Benton, the foursome gelled and wanted to find a project to work on together. Fatefully, David Newman's wife, while cleaning their young son's room, came across a Superman comic and suggested it as a fun source material. They presented it to Strouse and Adams, who, turns out, had been big fans of the Man of Steel in their Depression-era youths, and they all set out to work to bring the ultimate superhero to the stage, with Newman and Benton writing the book. Soon after it was decided, the final member of the team was added. Hal Prince boarded the project in fall of 1965 as both producer and director. Prince had already found great success as a producer, including the original productions of The Pajama Game, Damn Yankees, West Side Story, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and Fiddler on the Roof, to name but a few.
He's the real deal.
Though at this point, Prince had not yet had as many directing credits, and also with varying success. Getting the rights to the Superman character from DC turned out to be one of the easier aspects of the pre-production. The people at DC were eager to get Superman's name out in the public again, and only made two stipulations. One, they could only use a handful of characters from the comics, including Lois Lane and Daily Planet editor Perry White, and none of the iconic villains.
Boo, you whore.
And two, they couldn't name the show Superman the Musical, which they were totally planning on calling it. Thus, the ellipsis-filled title we have today. One of the challenges in bringing the comic book to the stage was in finding the right tone for the musical. The creative team decided that they didn't want this to be a kids show. While it could certainly be enjoyed by kids, they wanted adults to be able to see it and enjoy it as well. But how to go about this? The book writers didn't want to make fun of the material, but also felt they couldn't exactly play it totally straight either. They also decided early on to not do an origin story or adapt one of the comics, but come up with their own story. Another one of the challenges in bringing the cape-clad crime fighter to life was finding someone who audiences would accept as Superman. He needed to be tall, handsome, have the right physical build, and be able to sing and dance. And while that may sound like a piece of cake today, it was not as easy a task in 1966. As music writer Charles Strouse wrote in his memoirs, this was before everyone went to the gym. Hal Prince had a very clear vision of what Superman looked like. Prince wanted someone who was 6'4", which I happen to be, and 190 pounds, which I'm definitely not.
He's a big boy.
But Prince didn't stop there. Neck 17, chest 50, waist 32, hips 37.5, biceps 18.5, thighs 26.5, and calf 17. Though Prince later conceded that the calf measurement was a joke. After narrowing it down to 51 potential heroes, including a 1960 Olympic gold champion pole vaulter, the role went to Bob Holliday. Bob Holliday was actually the first actor the team saw, and it seemed like a perfect fit, and after the extensive search, their first instincts were right. Holliday had previously appeared on Broadway in the Tony and Pulitzer Prize-winning musical Fiorello, produced by Hal Prince.
What a man, what a job, all these people who look to us for justice.
Mr. Holliday would happily forever be associated with the Man of Steel and holds the record for the most live-action appearances as Superman. Rounding out the cast of the musical was Michael O'Sullivan as Dr. Abner Sedgwick, Don Chastain as Jim Morgan, and future star Linda Lavin as Sidney Carlton. All characters invented for the musical, in case you're wondering, why don't I recognize any of those names? Fun story actually, Linda Lavin had heard that Hal Prince, whom she had worked with before on a show called A Family Affair, was working on a Superman musical and desperately wanted the part of Lois Lane. To send Prince a clear message, Lavin bought a Superman comic, then cut out pictures of her own head and pasted them over every appearance of Lois Lane and sent the book to Prince. Hal Prince told her she wasn't Midwestern enough, but it all worked out in the end, with Miss Lavin stealing the show every night with her song You've Got Possibilities. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Joan Hotchkiss was originally cast as Lois Lane, but replaced out of town in Philadelphia by Patricia Morand, who took the show into New York. Another new character created for the musical was egomaniacal Daily Planet columnist Max Menken, who was played by star Jack Cassidy. Husband of music movie royalty Shirley Jones and father to teen heartthrobs David, Sean, and Patrick Cassidy, Jack Cassidy rose to fame on Broadway in shows like Wish You Were Here, Fade Out, Fade In with Carol Burnett, and She Loves Me, for which he won the Tony Award for Best Supporting Actor in a Musical in 1964. There is a lot of really fun information to come about this wacky gem of a show, like how Batman may have killed the Superman musical, what musical theater master was a big fan of the show, and of course, we have to talk about the truly awful TV adaptation in the 70s.
Yeah, I know.
But before we fly into that, let's break down the entire bonkers plot of this comic book musical comedy. Up, up, and away!
He just flew off.
The show begins with a bang, literally, during the overture.
Bullets can't hurt me.
The house is in darkness when a blaring alarm is heard. Lights up on the city of Metropolis. The corner of a bank currently being robbed is stage right, and the getaway car is stage left. 7 bank robbers exit the bank with bags of loot. A siren wails and the bank guards exit the bank and begin firing at the robbers making their way for the getaway car. The bank robbers fire back, shooting the guards. A crowd begins to form in the mayhem, and the crooks are about to make their escape when one of the guards barely clinging to life, exclaims, "Look up in the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's..." He dies.
Oh, damn.
But almost as finishing his sentence, Superman flies in and lands center stage. He grabs the car by the back fender and lifts it up, tossing it off stage. The crowd begins to cheer and Superman steps stage center. The crowd and street scene disappear as Superman changes back into his Clark Kent alter ego and sings to the audience about doing good.
Other men have their work to do. But as for me, I must live not one life but two. This disguise is really wonderful, for who would guess that underneath this white shirt is a great big red S. Every man has his job to do, and my job is doing good. I'll never stop doing good.
A spotlight hits Daily Planet columnist Max Menken, who bitterly gripes about Superman stealing all his thunder in the press. He disparages his monogrammed shirt and the fact that he has no last name. What's he trying to hide, he asks. That gives him an idea. Uncovering Superman's secret identity would be the news story of the decade. And then he says, maybe Lois Lane would stop throwing herself at Superman. Fade out on Max, fade up on Lois Lane, who admits to throwing herself at Superman. But what can she do, she says, he's just so good. Lights out on Lois Lane, lights up on Clark Kent. People need an awful lot of taking care of. They need me. Then lights come up on all the citizens of Metropolis who sing, "We Need Him."
In a world of evil and doubt, we need him, we need him. In these times of misery and crime, we need him, we need him. Complications, accusations, a world of cheap sensations, a world with no foundations, and so we need him.
Now at the offices of the Daily Planet, editor Perry White yells at Clark Kent asking where he's been. Clark says he's had another headache. Perry remarks that he's never seen a man in such rotten shape and exits. Lois tries asking Clark where he always disappears to, but he changes the subject by complimenting her dress. Max Menken enters with his secretary and sometimes girlfriend Sydney. She is very upset about Max standing her up the night before. Max tries to calm her down, but to no avail, and apologizes to Lois for her outbursts. Lois says, "It's okay, Max, I can take it." He says, "That's my girl," and Lois points at Sydney and says, "No, that's your girl."
Good for her.
Max goes back to arguing with Sydney while trying to dictate his newest Max Menken's Metropolis column to her. In the column, he writes that he's working on the biggest expose in years, and anyone with knowledge of Superman's identity should contact the paper. Lights out on Max and Sydney, and lights up on Clark Kent and Lois Lane. He asks what she's working on, and she says, oh, the same thing she's always working on, another Superman story. Clark says, that's a funny attitude, look how many times he's saved your life. Lois says, yeah, that's our whole relationship. I get into danger, he rescues me. But has he ever told me I'm attractive? Has he ever told me he loves me?
Don't I yearn and ache and shop?
She sings the semi-title song, It's Superman.
Oh, how I wish I weren't in love with Superman. A wasted life is all I've got with Superman. To hope that it could ever be is just a schoolgirl's fantasy. Oh, is there no one else for me but Superman?
After the song, well-known scientist Dr. Abner Sedgwick enters. He tells Lois, who recognizes him, that he desperately needs to get in touch with Superman and asks to speak in private. They go into her office, but Clark, of course, uses his super hearing to eavesdrop. Lois gushes a bit, saying that when anyone talks about the Metropolis Institute of Technology, or MIT, they really mean Dr. Abner Sedgwick. She also says she is very sorry that he didn't win the Nobel Prize this last time. The doctor says, oh no, it's fine. He was delighted that fellow scientist in the field of negative neutron research, Dr. Hashimoto of Tokyo, won the prize. Lois says, but your findings were the same as his. But Dr. Sedgwick says, yes, they corresponded for years, and their work was along very similar lines, but Dr. Hashimoto announced his findings first. But that's not why he's here, he says. He says the new nuclear reactor at the university has begun flashing a red warning light signaling a dangerous buildup of negative radioactive electrons. Upon hearing this, Clark hastily exits. Dr. Sedgwick goes on to explain to Lois that the usual methods to correct the situation have all failed, and that's why he needs to get in touch with Superman right away, or the entire city will be a graveyard.
That doesn't sound good.
Lois promises to get in touch with Superman right away, which makes Dr. Sedgwick very happy. The next little scene, done in front of the curtain so the set could be changed behind it, we see Clark Kent in a phone booth changing into his Superman outfit. He wrestles with the fact that his boss is going to be furious with him, but he has a responsibility to the city. But he also knows that Clark Kent is really the one who actually pays the bills. No time to waste though, it's up, up, and away, and he flies off stage. At the university, just outside the nuclear reactor, we find a small office with a couch, desk, and blackboard where lab assistant Jim Morgan is working on an equation. Dr. Sedgwick and Lois Lane enter, closely followed by Superman, who flies in. Sidebar, how did Superman not beat them there by like a good while?
Point out your plot holes elsewhere.
Anyway, the pair are relieved Superman is there, and Superman says, well, Professor, it seems like you've got yourself a nasty problem here. Let's give it the old college try. Dr. Sedgwick asks where his lead suit is. Jim tells him it's in the lead suitcase.
Ha!
And he begins to put it on. Lois says, you're not going in there, are you, Doctor? And Doc says, I must. I would never forgive myself if something happened to Superman. Superman reminds them that he's indestructible, but Jim says there's 200 megatons out of control in there, to which the Man of Steel remarks, well, there's a first time for everything. He uses his X-ray vision to determine that the trouble is in the gamma chamber, and he and Sedgwick head into the reactor. Lois asks Jim, aren't you going in there? He says, no way, you could get killed in there. I noticed Dr. Sedgwick went in there, she retorts. Yeah, well, he gets emotional about these kind of things. You mean the destruction of civilization? Oh, I should have known, Jim says. God save me from lady writers. Also lady scientists, lady painters, and lady housewives.
You have a real problem with women.
Offended and a little intrigued, Lois asks, what have you got against women anyway? Jim says, nothing. I married one once. Lois says she has my sympathies. And Jim says, mine too, and half my salary. Changing the subject, Jim starts explaining these safety precautions in place. He says if the radiation chamber gets above 1,000 Roentgens, we should get behind this special lead shield, or else our atomic structure would be rearranged into a fine gray powder. He adds, not a bad way to go, actually. Lois says, God save me from cynical young professors. Jim says, I choose to think of it as scientific detachment, and sings We Don't Matter at All.
So here you are, an earnest girl reporter, and you think you're something special in this vast eternity. Baby, you and I, we're just about as special as a walnut or a fly. We don't matter at all. We don't matter at all. We don't really matter at all. Am I getting through to you?
Not yet.
Lois begins to berate him for such a negative attitude when the alarm goes off and the red lights flash again. Lois runs for the protective shield, but Jim beats her to it. They squeeze in tight, which gets Jim all hot and bothered.
Ugh.
He makes a move on Lois, who, aware that she is getting to him, taunts him with her own verse of We Don't Matter at All.
So here we are, two herrings in the ocean, and the overbearing herring is coming on with me. Wrong approach, to me I'm much more special than a walnut or a roach. All we matter we do, what's the matter with you?
As the song ends, alarms blare again, and there is a big boom inside the reactor. Dr. Sedgwick emerges in tatters, his eyes wide with shock. "He did it," he says. "I've never would have believed anyone could withstand that kind of punishment." Superman enters totally unscathed and says, "Well, that's that. Thanks, Doctor. I've always wanted to see one of those gizmos up close." Lois asks Superman for a lift back to the Daily Planet, but he says he can't. He's got to be at the state capitol in 5 minutes. Jim, of course, jumps at the chance to give Lois a ride, which Lois accepts. Superman up and aways, and Jim offers Lois his arm, which she takes, and they exit. Alone, Dr. Sedgwick proclaims, "Damn, he's still alive."
What?
I know, shocking, right? He goes on to say, "Well, Plan A didn't work, but it's a big alphabet. I'll show them. They can't ignore me. 40 years of doing good, and for what? Nothing. Look at me, a 10-time Nobel Prize loser." He sings Revenge.
Revenge, revenge, that's all I live for now. I'll make them wince and cringe and cry. I spit in their collective eye. I'll have one thing before I die, and I'll have it by destroying the world's symbol of goodness, Superman. Revenge!
The next scene is at the offices of the Daily Planet. Clark Kent and Lois Lane are discussing her latest article about a group of Chinese acrobats called the Flying Lings not able to get work now that people can see Superman actually flying for free. Max enters at the same time as his secretary Sydney. She has a duffel bag and tells him she got everything he asked for: wire, black tape, and a clock. She asks what it's all for, and Max gleefully tells her he's going to be making a bomb.
Say what now?
He explains that today is the last day of the secret identity contest, and he has 5 good suspects, one of which has got to be Superman, so the bomb will force him to reveal himself. Sydney tries to tell Max that he's crazy and talk him out of it, but he's set on making the front page headlines. He gives her the names of his suspects and tells her to have them all here tomorrow at 4 p.m. sharp. Sydney is getting more than a little tired of being bossed around by, well, her boss, but mentions that they haven't had a date in a week. Max says, "Look, sweetheart, I belong to the world." Sydney calls him a low, rotten, lying, cheating rat, and Max says, "Well, nobody's perfect," and immediately ducks into Lois's office and starts hitting on her and asks her out.
What a slime ball.
Lois tells Max that she has other plans this evening. Max says some plans, flying around with that carrier pigeon looking for bank robbers. But Lois says, "I don't have a date with Superman. I have a date with someone else." Ooh. But Max says, "Oh, Lois, when are you gonna get smart? One night with me and you'll fly." He sings the suavely sickening Woman for the Man.
You're the woman for the man who has everything. Let me show you how to live. Girls who get are girls who give. You're the woman for the man who has everything. I'm a man who has everything, everything but you.
Sweetheart, what are you fighting it for? Can't deny it though, the old chemistry's getting to you. Hubba hubba.
When he's done singing, Lois looks at him dead in the eyes and says, "Max, that's 6 minutes of my day shot to hell," and exits, which is just so amazingly funny to me. Another great bit during the song I wanted to mention is Max at one point starts doing a soft shoe dance and says to Lois, "You know, I used to be a hoofer before I started writing the column." And Lois says, "Break a leg, kid," to which Max says,
"Sorry, sweetheart, never do requests."
That just cracks me up. Anyways, Max exits after being shot down by Lois. Max's lover/secretary Sydney is leaving too in a huff, and Clark wishes her a good night, to which she responds, "Mind your business." Muttering to herself about what a rat Max is, she suddenly takes notice of the clearly available Clark. She flirts with him a little, asking what he does at night. Of course, Clark lies, saying reading and stamp collecting and then turning in early. She begins sizing him up and sings one of my favorite show tunes, You've Got Possibilities.
Don't back away. Come on, unbend. Why can't I be your little friend? Baby, you're improvable. It won't take long. Mountains can be movable if the spirit's strong. You've got possibilities. Takes a woman to tell. I see possibilities. Let me pry you from your shell. Relax, sweetheart. I'm not gonna bite you yet.
I mean, come on, that's such a great song. The next little scenelet is another in-one scene, which is in front of the curtain to allow for a set change. A spotlight on Dr. Abner Sedgwick on the phone with Lois Lane. He tells her he has the most exciting news. They've decided to name a new wing of the physics department at the university in Superman's honor. He says he's going to give the dedication speech, but knows so little about Superman's life. Lois, over the phone, offers to show him a video presentation all about Superman, and Sedgwick says he'll be over in a half hour and hangs up. A film about Superman's origins, he says. That may tell me just what I need to know. Now at the Daily Planet screening room, Lois enters with Jim Morgan, the lab assistant. They're first to arrive, and Jim suggests they go up to the balcony and neck, which means, for you youngins out there, make out.
Thanks, Grandpa.
Lois giggles and says, Jim, Dr. Sedgwick could be here at any moment. But Jim says, nah, it'll take him another hour just to get his car started. Lois says, don't make fun of him. He's a wonderful man. Jim says, you think he's wonderful, you think Superman's wonderful, but when you get alone with someone who really is wonderful, you don't know it. And Jim grabs Lois and kisses her. A long, slow kiss. Mid-kiss, Jim suddenly remembers he's got a 1 o'clock class and departs.
I must leave you.
Alone, Lois sings What I've Always Wanted.
What I've always wanted. What I've always wanted. Being just a wife, that corny life is what I've always wanted. A dogwood tree, the A and P, conformity, green stamps in a book, making like a cook.
After the song, Dr. Sedgwick enters. He says, sorry, I'm late. I had trouble starting my car. Lois explains that they made this video several years ago as a public service for city schools. The lights go down and they play the almost 5-minute video explaining the history of Superman. I guess just in case anyone in the audience doesn't know all about Superman. You may be asking yourself, Mark, how do you know the video was almost 5 minutes? Well, my friends, it's because I managed to find a copy of the actual original video used in the Broadway production in 1966. Here is a little snippet featuring Bob Holliday as Superman.
Since his arrival, organized crime in Metropolis has steadily decreased from year to year. And yet, Superman still finds time to offer his services to the less fortunate among us, our senior citizens, our shut-ins, and our citizens of the future.
After the film ends, Dr. Sedgwick is deep in thought. Lois tells him they also have a complete file on Superman, but the doctor says that won't be necessary. He's got everything he needs. Lois leaves and Dr. Sedgwick proclaims, I got it! That man on the screen is wallowing in adoration and begging for applause. He thinks they all need him, but he's the one who really needs them. He adds, of course, I can't do it all myself. I'll need accomplices. And he sings a reprise of Revenge, which sadly wasn't recorded. We're now at Dr. Sedgwick's blue velour study.
That's very specific.
He's meeting with Mr. Ling, father of the Chinese acrobatic troupe, the Flying Lings, whom Lois had written about earlier, how they couldn't get work now because of Superman. Sedgwick and Mr. Ling commiserate over their shared hatred of Superman, and Mr. Ling agrees to help Dr. Sedgwick bring him down. Sedgwick tells Mr. Ling that he needs strong, skilled, stealthy men to help carry out his plan, and of course, Mr. Ling introduces his sons, the Flying Lings, and they do a big acrobatic number and demonstration in the song Everything's Easy When You Know How, which also wasn't recorded. And alright, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, yeah, this was all really pretty racist. I mean, a Chinese acrobat troupe in and of itself is of course not racist, but the original script has them speaking in horrible broken English, even more horrible Chinese sort of sounding names, and most egregiously, I think the actors playing the roles were not Chinese or Asian at all, and were in yellowface. Definitely not okay then, certainly not okay now. Anyways, Sedgwick tells Mr. Ling they'll rendezvous the following night at City Hall Tower. Back at the Daily Planet offices, Max's 5 Superman suspects are there mulling about, sort of confused as to why they're there. Sydney tells Max she hid the bomb in Clark Kent's wastebasket, though she tries to talk him out of the plan one more time. Max tells her to go down to the composing room and make sure they hold the front page until he calls her. Before she leaves, Sydney says to Max, "I just want you to know, I'll stick by you all throughout the trial, and I'll visit you every day in jail." But Max is certain the plan cannot fail. "One of those men out there is Superman," he says. The 5 confused Superman suspects are led into Max's office and demand to know why they've been called there in the middle of a workday. Max tells them that soon, 4 of them will leave just as they came in, but for one of them, the game is up. Clark Kent enters and Max makes a big deal about not wanting him in the room. Clark is about to leave when Max finally tells the men the one and only Superman is in the room with them at this very moment. Clark, of course, freezes in surprise. Max inspects each man, revealing that they've each miraculously survived deadly situations. One suspect fell 900 feet out of an airplane without a parachute and walked away unscathed. Another suspect saved a group of mountain climbers by holding the rope in his teeth and hanging there for 48 hours. Though suspect number 5 is only there because he was seen changing in the locker room with what looked like a blue shirt with a red S on underneath his clothes. Then Max tells them all his plan. He's hidden a ticking time bomb somewhere in the office. All of the men bolt for the door, but Lois enters first. Clark tries to get her out, but Max tells her to stay. Superman wouldn't let anything happen to her. It's perfect. Clark is desperately trying to locate the bomb in the chaos, and finally does so with 25 seconds to spare, pretending to clumsily spill milk on the bomb to short-circuit it and maintain his secret identity. Max begins to berate Clark when suddenly a very delusional suspect number 5 jumps onto the window ledge proclaiming that he is indeed Superman. The crazy man gives a little Superman-esque speech and then up and aways himself out the window. Thrilled, Max rushes to his phone and tells Sydney to stop the presses. He's got it. Superman's secret identity is... But before he can finish, the real Superman, who snuck out during suspect number 5's little speech, jumps in with suspect number 5 in his arms. Did you drop this, Max? Blackout. We now find ourselves on the top of City Hall Tower. A guide is telling a group of tourists that this is the highest man-made elevation in Metropolis at 900 feet. As the guide leads the group off, Dr. Sedgwick and Mr. Ling enter. Sedgwick hands the confused Mr. Ling a bunch of dynamite and tells him he needs his son to place the dynamite at various points around the outside of the building. Dr. Sedgwick leaves as the Lings start placing the explosives. Another scene change, and we are at the dedication ceremony for the new Superman Hall at MIT, the Metropolis Institute of Technology, the university Dr. Sedgwick works at. The crowd is waiting, and Dr. Sedgwick informs the crowd that he's received word that Superman should be there any moment. On cue, Superman flies in saying, "Sorry I'm late, there was some Boy Scouts lost on Lookout Mountain." There's lots of pomp and circumstance. Dr. Sedgwick makes sure all the reporters get lots of photos of a smiling Superman having fun with the crowd. The crowd sings, "It's super nice."
It's super nice. It's super nice to be with you. To be with you. We only hope you feel it too. Oh, so glad you're here. So glad you're here. All red and blue. All red and blue. A super nice. What person like you?
The song ends and Superman shows off his strength to the adoring crowd, lifting the speech platform up over his head with Dr. Sedgwick and a choir still on it. Suddenly, there's a sound of a large explosion. People scream and cry out. They all shield their eyes in horror. Sedgwick, still being lifted up by Superman, looks at him and says, "What a catastrophe! City Hall destroyed! And here you are, Superman, entertaining us. Oh, my friend, it is such a pity you weren't there to help."
That's cold.
The crowd slowly turn and all glare accusingly at Superman as the curtain falls. End of Act 1.
Well, it's very good so far.
Intermission! And you know what you do at intermission? That's right, Lois Lane. You subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. Do it now. It really helps us out, especially if you're finding some value in it. I have more great videos coming out soon, and I gotta hear, oh, no, that's it. Act 2's about to start. Let's take our seats.
Okay then, on with the show.
Entr'acte. After the entr'acte, we get one of those weird little Act 2 opening songs that are sort of detached from the rest of the show. Think Penny in My Pocket from Hello Dolly.
It's sorta true.
Tim Minchin is also a big fan of these kinds of songs in his shows, like with Groundhog Day with the song Playing Nancy, and Matilda with the song Telly. Anyway, Max Menken comes out center stage in front of a big projection of a newspaper with a picture of Superman and the headline, "Where was Superman?" Max gloats at the superhero's public fall from grace and sings, "So long, big guy."
So long, big guy, it's tough to say goodbye. So long, big guy, here's mud in your X-ray eye. Farewell, old pal, you know we'll all miss you. You had your day, so what is there left to say? Sure you were doing swell. Too bad you fell, big fella. You might as well turn in those tights, big guy. Take your last bow and look who's the big guy now.
God, I love Jack Cassidy. We now find ourselves at the apartment of Clark Kent, and it's clear the Man of Steel is dealing with some fragile emotions. The place is a pigsty, and though midday, all the curtains are drawn. Honestly, I feel you, big guy. The clearly depressed Superman sits among his empty jars of peanut butter and stacks of newspapers. Lois Lane knocks on the door looking for Clark, and Superman quickly tries to clean up a bit and attempts to open the door just a crack, but Lois bursts right in. She asks Superman what he's doing at Clark's apartment. He says, Clark went away for the weekend and let me use his apartment to hide out.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Lois feels sorry for Superman, saying, "They've been really making it tough for you, haven't they?" Superman says he knew the hero worship would eventually wear off, but it seems like people were just waiting for him to make one mistake. He sings Strongest Man.
Why can't the strongest man in the world be the happiest man in the world? Why does the strongest man in the world have the heaviest heart in the world? Why must I, the man of steel, feel as helpless as a man of straw? They used to hold me in such awe. Now the cheers have turned to jeers.
During the song, Superman distractedly twists his metal floor lamp in knots, smashes his coffee table, and other fun physical bits like that. After the song, Lois tells Superman to not think like that, and she'll always be a friend to him. She then tells him that she's been wanting to talk to him about something.
That can't be good.
She says, "For a long time now, I've been an enormous burden to you, Superman. Do you realize you've saved my life 15 times? She says, "I just want you to know that from now on, you won't have to worry about me any longer." Superman is shocked and tries several times to interject, but Lois continues on. She says, "I guess I've grown up. You see, I met this man. I think you know him, Jim Morgan." Superman says, "But you only met him last week." She says, "I know. That was the week I grew up," which is another line that makes me laugh. Superman again tries to speak, but Lois says, "I hope I won't need you anymore, Superman. Heaven knows you never needed me." She exits and Superman says, "But Lois, I love you," himself realizing it for the first time. In the next scene, we see Max dictating his latest column to Sydney, all about the rise and fall of Superman in disgrace. When done, Max tells Sydney that was one of the most beautiful columns he's ever written. Sydney says, "Yeah, and by tomorrow night it'll be on the bottom half of all the bird cages in Metropolis." Max says, "You're right. It's a shame to let all those good columns go to waste. I'll put them in a book, The Bedside Max Menken." Max tells Sydney that you should write a book too. He says, "Call it My Years with Max." Sydney sings the sarcastic, "Ooh, do you love you?"
I've seen nothing to match such pure conceit. You're so sold on yourself, it's sorta sweet. You're what you enjoy. Boy, it's boy meets boy. You're just what you deserve, so stay true blue. Do you love you?
At the end of the song, the Lings appear and hit Max over the head and take him off stage without Sydney seeing. The lights come up on Dr. Abner Sedgwick's laboratory at MIT, and the Lings enter with the unconscious Max. Behind Dr. Sedgwick is a massive computer. For you kids out there, this is what a computer looked like in the 1960s.
Big, huge.
Max comes to and demands to know why he's been brought there. Sedgwick says, "I wanted to show you this, the Brainiac 7, the most sophisticated brain in the Western world and my creation." Max says, "Oh, I get it, you want to plug in the paper. Well, you got the wrong guy, you should have snatched the science editor." But Dr. Sedgwick says, "Mr. Menken, you don't understand," and proceeds to very long-windedly explain the science behind the computer, basically all to explain that it's going to figure out the secret identity of Superman. There's actually a really fun bit during this long explanation Dr. Sedgwick is giving, where Max is sort of, all while slowly backing up until he's all the way off stage, only to be brought back on a few seconds later by the Lings. Once Dr. Sedgwick gets to the point that the computer is able to reveal the secret identity of Superman, he reveals the person the computer has determined is the hero, and it's none other than Max Menken. Max, of course, laughs hysterically. He says, "You're out of your skull, you maniac." And Dr. Sedgwick goes seriously, violently deranged for a minute, says, "Don't say that, no one can say that." After he calms down, he tells Max there's no use denying it, the computer knows it must be someone who works at the Daily Planet. Max says, "Just because I work at the Daily Planet, you might as well pick any jerk. You might as well pick Clark Kent." Dr. Sedgwick says, "Oh my heavens, it never even occurred to me to put Clark Kent into the computer. He's practically invisible." Dr. Sedgwick runs to the computer, inputs Clark Kent, and sure enough, it confirms their suspicions. Max jumps up excitedly and goes to leave to the Daily Planet to get his front page story, but Dr. Sedgwick pulls a gun on him, saying he's sorry, but he's not allowed to walk the streets knowing what he knows. Max, squirming under the barrel of the gun, says, I wouldn't tell anyone. Maybe I can even help you." Dr. Sedgwick says, "You? Help me?" Max says, "All right, maybe I can't help you with Superman, but maybe I can help you with Clark Kent. My secretary even goes out with the guy." Sedgwick and Max make a pact to bring down Superman together, and they sing "You've Got What I Need." Here is a bit from the Encore's production of that song with Will Swenson as Max and David Pitu as Dr. Sedgwick.
You got what it takes, sweetie, all the way from A to Z. You got what I need, baby, 'cause from now on, baby, you got me.
You're a thoroughly immoral person, Max. I like you.
Well, thanks, Professor. It's mutual. From now on, it's gonna be you and me, Professor.
Call me Abner.
Abner. I love that name.
The next scene takes place on a very cool set piece. It's a giant 8-panel comic book with different characters in each panel and a sign that says, "Meanwhile." They all sing about what's on their minds, and what's on their minds? It's Superman!
From Budapest to Baltimore, it's Superman. His figure whirling round my brain, a creature science can't explain. It's not a bird, it's not a plane, it's Superman.
During the song, Max invites Sydney and Clark, whom he knows is really Superman now, to a party later, which they accept. Max rings Dr. Sedgwick and tells him the plan is all set.
No. Yes.
The next scene finds us in a dank, shadowy, abandoned power station with pipes and old generators strewn about. We can also see the base of a water tower with a ladder going up to it. Sydney and Clark enter, confused. "What kind of place is this for a party?" asks Clark. Dr. Sedgwick and Max then appear out of the shadows. Max tells Sydney to run along and hurries her out the door while she protests. Sedgwick says that was clumsy, Max, but Max brushes it off and says, "Don't worry about her, she won't make any trouble." Clark tells Sedgwick that he'd better start explaining what's going on here. Sedgwick says, "Perhaps this will clarify the matters for you," and claps his hands. One of the Lings appears and opens a door to reveal Lois Lane, gagged and unconscious, tied to one of the generators. Sedgwick says, "Looking for a convenient telephone booth, Mr. Kent? Or shall I say, Superman?" Clark is dumbfounded. "What did you say?" Sedgwick says, "I believe you heard me clearly. You do have super hearing." He tells Superman to take a good look at the generator Lois is tied to. Any sudden vibrations will send 6,000 volts hurtling willy-nilly through Miss Lane's frail body. Superman says, "What do you want, Sedgwick?" And Sedgwick says, "Just a few minutes of your time for a chat." He tells Max to leave them alone. And Max says, "No, I'll stick around. I want to be in on this too, partner." But Sedgwick claps his hands again, and two of the Lings appear and grab Max and drag him off. Then Dr. Sedgwick launches his big attack on Superman using psychological warfare. I mean, it's kind of smart from a story standpoint since there's no way to really defeat Superman physically, and it's also kind of smart from a producer standpoint because there's no big battle with expensive special effects. Anyways, Dr. Sedgwick plays it up real friendly and full of concern for Superman. He says, "I had to see you because I'm deeply troubled. The public has turned against you. Could it be that they've sensed something about you that you've been unwilling to recognize in yourself?" Sedgwick starts to convince Superman that he neurotically craves the adoration of millions to make him happy, which leads to his dangerous and destructive acts. Superman says, "I was doing good." But Sedgwick says, "Good? Good is such a relative term. If I swat a fly, it might be good for me, but is it good for the fly?"
He's got a point.
Superman begins to crack. He says, half trying to convince himself, "Metropolis is a lot safer place because of me." But Sedgwick hammers him again with rhetoric. He says, "Is it safer? All you're really doing is catching the criminals after the fact. If you really cared about this city, you'd do something about the conditions that breed crime. Why haven't you? I'll tell you why. It's because if there's no crime in Metropolis, Metropolis wouldn't need you and you couldn't live with that." Superman is really now starting to doubt himself. Sedgwick suggests that Clark Kent is actually a much more adjusted human being than Superman. And Superman says, "No, you're wrong. Clark Kent is nothing, it's me they love, and takes off his Clark Kent outfit to reveal his Superman costume. Dr. Sedgwick continues his assault with Superman with psychological punch after punch. He brings up his childhood and how his parents, quote, put him in a rocket and shot him out of their lives. How he feels the need to live a double life as Clark Kent. Could it be because he can't accept responsibilities for his actions? Superman, almost down for the count, says, have I no right to do my job? Sedgwick says, who gave you that right? Who set you up as judge? Who told you that we needed a Superman? Superman slowly drops to the ground, defeated. Sedgwick begins gloating at finally bringing Superman down when Jim Morgan rushes in looking for Lois. He says, some girl phoned me and said Lois was here and in danger. Sedgwick vows to deal with Sidney later and dispatches some of the Lings who knock Jim out and lay him at Superman's feet. Superman doesn't react at all though. He's totally lost in brooding thought. Blackout.
Later that night,
we see Max and Lois, who's still tied to the generator, being guarded by some of the Lings. Max and Lois bicker for a bit before Lois says, let's see now, I'm sure I can make sense of all this, and sings, I'm not finished yet.
I'm not finished yet, Superman won't let me die. He will plummet from the sky. Why, he's on his way, I'll bet. Any moment he'll appear, and he'll whisk me out of here. No, sir, I'm not finished yet.
After the song, Sedgwick enters, and Max tells him he'll pay for that little stunt in there, but Sedgwick brushes it off. Jim enters, gagged. Dr. Sedgwick seems happy to see him. He says, Jim, I have wonderful news. The experiment is complete. Jim says, you'll never get away with this, Sedgwick. But Sedgwick says, don't be absurd. I have already succeeded in destroying the ultimate symbol of good. Let me show you. He calls out for Superman, and a downtrodden shell of a superhero enters. Lois cries out, Superman, what's happened to you? But Superman just ends up apologizing to her for using her to satisfy his own ego. To further show his success, Sedgwick asks Superman, can you fly? And Superman says, no, nobody can fly.
Oh, no.
There, says Sedgwick, I have made him mine. Max chimes in that he's part of this too, and if we've got Superman in our control, we're gonna make some changes to this city. But Sedgwick says, we? Do you think I'd allow your loathsome lust for power to tarnish my achievement? Try and understand this, Max. The partnership is dissolved.
Total double cross.
Max is, of course, outraged. Nobody double crosses me, he says. I'm half of this operation and I've got something to say about how we run it. But suddenly, Mr. Ling pulls a revolver on Max and tells him that he is no part of this operation.
Oh, damn!
Suddenly, all of the flying Lings appear and aim rifles at Superman, Lois, Jim, and Max. Mr. Ling then steps forward and tells Dr. Sedgwick that he has the great honor to present him on behalf of the People's Republic of China the Mao Zedong Peace Prize. Dr. Sedgwick, not used to getting awards, is completely shocked and overcome by this. Sedgwick is clearly off his rocker at this point and begins to give a thank you speech, one that he's clearly practiced more than a few times.
I haven't had an orthodox career, and I've wanted more than anything to have your respect. The first time I didn't feel it, but this time I feel it, and I can't deny the fact that you like me.
As Dr. Sedgwick begins to cry, Mr. Ling tells him that the helicopter is due in 10 minutes to take them to a submarine waiting offshore that will take them all to Peking. Mr. Ling tells Max that he can either come with them and find a rich, rewarding life in the People's Republic or die now.
Choices.
He goes on to say it would be a wise decision to join them because in exactly 22 minutes, the offshore submarine will launch a missile with an atomic warhead aimed directly at Metropolis. Lois is aghast and she screams, Superman, you can't let this happen. Don't just stand there.
Snap out of it!
Mr. Ling then brutally slaps Lois across the face. Superman starts to stir, but Jim is the one that stands up for Lois. Jim says, get your hands off of her, and grabs for Mr. Ling's gun. Mr. Ling and Jim tuffle, and Mr. Ling fires the gun. Jim falls to the ground, and Lois screams. Superman begins to break through the fog. He says, hey, what's going on here? He whips into action, battling the troop of flying Lings in a spectacular fight scene. The Lings get more and more desperate as the fight goes on, going from karate to using knives, to crowbars, to furniture, battering rams, sledgehammers, and almost anything else they can get their hands on. But of course, Superman fights them all off and sings the song, Pow, Bam, Zonk.
Come on, pow, let's go, bam! I need a little exercise. Take that pow and that zonk. Let's see what you can do. You boys, pow, a good bam. I like a crook who really tries. Come on, pow, let's go, wham! You'll learn a trick or two. Gee, it's funny, but only a moment ago. Pow, bam, zonk! I doubted myself, and all that was right.
The song ends with the bad guys piled up at Superman's feet. During the song, Max ran to a shadowy corner and hid cowering. Dr. Sedgwick, sensing all hope is lost, starts going up the stairs to the base of the water tower holding Lois hostage. Lois cries out, "Help! Help, Superman!" And Superman gets to say, "Don't worry, Lois, I'll save you." Sedgwick tries to remind Superman that he cannot fly, remember? Nobody can fly. But it doesn't work, and Superman does indeed fly right up to the base of the water tower. As Superman starts advancing on Sedgwick, Sedgwick uses Lois as a shield and fires his gun at Superman, but of course, bullets have no effect. Suddenly, the loud sound of a helicopter is heard overhead, and a rope ladder drops down on the opposite side of the stage from the water tower, slowly moving towards the water tower. Sedgwick sees this as his way out, and he flings Lois towards Superman, who catches her, and Sedgwick races to catch the rope ladder as it nears the edge of the water tower. He makes a leap for the ladder, but ends up plummeting to his death on a live electric wire, which sends up showers of sparks. The cops then enter, led by Sidney, who starts looking for Max. As the cops arrest the Lings and lead them out, Lois goes to Jim to see if he's alright. Jim says, I'll live. To which Lois kind of coldly replies, "Wasn't Superman wonderful?"
Lois, what the hell?
Jim, being the bigger man, says, "You're telling the wrong fella." Lois realizes that with Jim's help, she's made her decision. Lois goes up to Superman and says, "Well, you've saved my life. Again." Superman asks one of the cops to make sure Lois gets home safe, but before she leaves, he tells her, "You know what they say when you save a person's life, right, Lois?" Lois smiles and leaves with the cop. Jim goes up to Superman and says, "You know, she really loves you." And Superman quietly says, "Yes." Jim says, "Don't take it for granted. You're a lucky guy." And Superman says, "I know." In a dark corner, Sidney has finally spotted Max. Max is desperately trying to stay hidden and not get implicated in this mess, but he can't help tell Sidney that he's got a great story. He knows Superman's secret identity. He says, "It's Clark Kent." And Sidney says, "Oh, I get it. You're going to plead insanity." He says, "No, really, listen, it's Clark Kent." And Sidney says, "Listen, Max, I've gone out with Clark Kent, and believe me, he's no Superman." Sidney then says, "Max, you see that nice policeman over there? Good. Now we're going over to that nice man in the cape and tell him you're sorry for all the trouble you've caused." Max is reluctant, but Sidney clearly means business. Max, with the energy of a little kid being forced to make up with a friend, says, "Hey, Soup, I'm sorry for the trouble I caused you."
I'm sorry, what was that?
Superman lets him off the hook after making him promise to be good and always respect the law, when a cop enters crying, "Superman, there's a missile heading this way." Superman says, "A missile? This is a job for Superman."
Up, and away!
The company sings a reprise of its Superman. And You've Got What I Need.
You've got what it takes, sweetie, all the way from A to Z. You've got what I need, baby, and from now on, baby, you've got me.
The end.
That's a wonderful story, Lois.
Thanks, Clark, but I owe it all to Superman.
During the show's pre-Broadway tryout in Philadelphia, things weren't going super great. At one performance, attended by orchestrator Jonathan Tunick with his friend, composer, and lyricist Ed Kleban, there were lots of technical glitches and such, but more alarmingly, there were no laughs. Tunick said there would be a gag, he and Kleban would sort of chuckle, but the audience would be dead silent. Except for one man. One lone man would reportedly loudly guffaw with glee at almost every joke. In fact, outside of intermission, the pair of writers overheard two ladies talking, with one asking who that strange young man was who keeps laughing at all the wrong places. That man was Stephen Sondheim. Whoa. It's a bird, ... It's a plane, ... It's Superman, open to some actually pretty great reviews. The all-important New York Times critic Stanley Kaufman wrote, "It is easily the best musical so far of this season," adding that he believed it would be enjoyable in any season. Not too shabby. Audiences too seem to love the show. But to everyone's shock and dismay, the enthusiastic reviews and word of mouth did not translate into ticket sales.
No one willingly buys theater tickets.
The show did a lot to try to get butts in the seats, seeing that despite not aiming necessarily for a family audience, many young kids attended the shows with their parents. Prince had the schedule changed to include 4 matinees a week. Bob Holliday also went above and beyond for the show, but he also truly loved being Superman. He would actually remain in costume after matinees and invite crowds of children backstage after the performance to meet them and sign autographs. How cool is that? He also appeared on an episode of the game show I've Got a Secret in 1966 as Superman to promote the show.
How's the show going? Marvelous. The audience reaction is just wonderful to us. Well, when the audience here saw you at the opening of the show, they really went crazy, so I imagine how it is over at the theater.
One of my absolute favorite Bob Holliday stories from It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman was that one performance during a flying sequence, the shackle connecting him to the harness broke and he fell over 6 feet to the ground. Without missing a beat, he bounced back on his feet, looked at the audience and said, "That would have hurt any mortal man," and the audience leapt to its feet in applause. The show was nominated for only 3 Tony Awards in 1966, Best Actor for Jack Cassidy, Best Supporting Actor for Michael O'Sullivan's Dr. Sedgwick, and Best Supporting Actress for Patricia Moran's Lois Lane, but none won.
That's outrageous.
Despite all the goodwill, good reviews, and publicity, It's a Bird closed on July 17th, 1966 after only 129 performances. Losing an estimated $400,000 to $600,000, it was one of the biggest financial flops in Broadway history up to that time. That title is currently being held by another comic book musical, but that's a video for another day. There are several theories as about why Superman failed to catch on with the ticket-buying audiences. Some believe the show could never overcome the kiddie feel, which turned off adults at the time. Others blame the marketing, feeling that the name Superman alone was relied on to sell tickets, and the show wasn't promoted properly. Another theory was about the cost of the tickets. Hal Prince came up with an idea to have dirt cheap tickets available to the show, $2 to be exact, but only if you ordered in advance and by mail. If you went directly to the box office, however, tickets were an astounding $12 a piece.
This is outrageous!
Now I can hear you all guffawing through the screen. Yes, that is ridiculously cheap by today's standards, but at the time, that was the most expensive ticket price on Broadway.
That is outrageous!
But a big culprit in the death of the Superman musical, most often blamed, is Batman.
Holy inferiority complex, Batman!
Around the same time as the musical had its short-lived stint on Broadway, the immensely popular Batman TV show starring Adam West was airing. With a mixture of silliness, style, and Pam-bow zonks of its own, all right there, beamed directly into your living room twice a week.
Twice? 2 times.
Why spend money to see the same kind of thing on Broadway? It's a Bird, It's a Plane is Superman's life, after its temporary Broadway outing, has been fairly limited. There were 2 regional productions of Superman done right after the show closed on Broadway, both starring Bob Holliday back in the title role. The venues for the 2 regional productions at St. Louis Muni and the Kansas City Starlight Theater Both are giant outdoor theaters, so large cranes were used to fly Superman on and off stage. Other notable cast members from those regional productions were Karen Morrow as Sydney and Charles Nelson Riley as Dr. Abner Sedgwick. I would have loved to have seen him play that role. The song You've Got Possibilities was the only song from the score to really break out into the pop world, being recorded by Peggy Lee, among others. The song was even featured in a Pillsbury commercial in 2005. Then there is the 1975 television version of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman. Holy moly, you guys.
This is gonna be good.
Okay, so for some reason, ABC produced this TV version of Superman, but the early critical reception was so poor, they relegated it to their Wide World of Entertainment time slot, which was late at night, opposite The Tonight Show, when most people, they hoped, would miss it. The show was significantly shortened to a brisk 90 minutes with several songs cut like Doing Good, We Don't Matter at All, and So Long Big Guy. One song was added though, a number called It's a Great Country. It was given to a group of mafioso-style gangsters who mercifully replaced the Flying Lings in the TV version. The fairly impressive cast featured Funny Lady and the Cat herself, Leslie Ann Warren as Lois Lane, Kenneth Mars, fresh off playing the Inspector in Young Frankenstein, played Max Menken, David Wayne played Dr. Sedgwick, and Loretta Swit, best known then as Hot Lips Houlihan on MASH, was Max's secretary Sydney. The Man of Steel himself was admirably played by David Wilson. With its cheesy rewrites, sort of updated 70s feel, shoestring budget, and rushed production, apparently they filmed the whole thing in 3 days with reportedly 1 week's rehearsal. It's no surprise that this is known to musical aficionados as one of the worst adaptations of a musical put on film. The whole thing is up on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the description if you want to torture yourself.
We should warn you, before you watch it, don't watch it.
There have been a few revivals throughout the years. The Goodspeed Opera House in East Haddam, Connecticut did a poorly received production in 1992 where they did change out the Flying Lings, but in their post-Gulf War wisdom replaced them with the Arabic Flying Fazumis. Yikes. In 2007, a production in Los Angeles, California featured Cheyenne Jackson in the title role, with Jean Louisa Kelly as Lois Lane, Richard Kind as Dr. Sedgwick, Patrick Cassidy played Max Menken, stepping into the role his father originated, and the show's composer Charles Strouse even played Daily Planet editor Perry White. Man, that is an incredible cast. A 2010 production in Dallas starred Matt Cavanaugh as Clark Kent / Superman and was heavily revised from its original form. Songs were rearranged, some cut, others cut from the original production were added back in, but the biggest change was resetting the show to 1939 instead of 1966. There was also a fun production in 2013 as part of City Center Encore series here in New York City that I worked merch for way back when. That production starred Will Swenson as Max Menken and Edward Watts as Superman. As for the original cast and creatives of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, Linda Lavin, of course, went on to great fame in Alice, the TV show, and on and off Broadway in several shows. Jack Cassidy would guest star in several television shows over the next 10 years before his untimely death. The character of Ted Baxter in The Mary Tyler Moore Show was actually written with Cassidy in mind for the role, but he ended up turning it down. Superman himself, Bob Holliday, continued playing the Kryptonian a couple more times in a Superman audiobook and in an Aqua Velva commercial in 1971.
I just don't leap into the day, even if I am the Man of Steel. In fact, I'm not ready to leap even one tall building until I shower and shave and splash on new Aqua Velva surf.
But he soon left the business and ran a successful home building business in the Pocono Mountains. But he was always happy to appear at conventions or productions of Superman and chat with fans. Charles Strouse and Lee Adams would write many more shows together and separate. A lot were flops like a Broadway musical, yes that's the title, and Bring Back Birdie, a poorly thought out sequel to their early hit Bye Bye Birdie. I do have an old breakdown for that show. But they would have some hits too, like Applause, and Charles Strouse would have a mega hit with Annie in 1977 with Martin Charnin. As for book writers David Newman and Robert Benton, they would go on to write the screenplays for acclaimed movies like Bonnie and Clyde, What's Up Doc, and in 1978, the pair would write the screenplay for the hugely successful and influential Superman the movie.
Shut up.
Luckily, none of their old ideas for the Man of Steel were kept. What did you guys think of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman? Did the campy, convoluted plot turn you off, or did the swing and score win you over for good? Let me know down in the comments. I absolutely love hearing from you guys. If you enjoyed this video, giving it a like is a heroic thing to do. And share this video with the comic book fan in your life. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys that have stuck around to the very end are my absolute favorite. If you're still watching, comment below with pow bam zonk so I know who my loyal video finishers out there are. But until next time, citizens, I'm Mark Bonanni, this is Broadway by Ghostlight. I'll see y'all next time. Up, up, and away!